Okay, let us begin. Sorry, having a little bit of a technical issue. Okay, I think we're good. All right, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining. Um, First of all, tonight's class is, of course, in the merit of all the Jewish people in the land of Israel, all over the world, those who need to be freed, those that need to are on the front lines, those that need to be healed. God should give them everything that they need. Of course, if you'd like to sponsor a class, please let us know. We really appreciate it. It helps us continue to do these classes. And now let's get right to it. This week's Torah portion is Parsha's Pinchas. Pinchas is, he avenges God, so to speak, by killing the leader of the tribe of Shimon, who made a Chil Hashem. He desecrated God's name by cohabitating with a non-Jewish woman in front of the entire Jewish people, making fun of Moses and Aaron and everybody. And he, Pinchas, avenges God, and he is given as reward the priesthood. Now, why is he given the priesthood? Seemingly, he is a grandson of Aaron. However, Pinchas was skipped over because the Torah says that the priesthood goes to Aaron and his sons and the children who will come afterwards. However, Pinchas was already born, so therefore he missed out. So God says, "I'm giving you the covenant of peace, because you did this for me, and you created peace in the amongst Jewish people by stopping the plague. Therefore, he is given the reward of the priesthood." Now, the Medrash, I should say, comments on this and says, Pinchas is Eliyahu Hanavi. That Eliyahu, who Elijah the prophet, is Pinchas, they're the same person. As it says, that just like it says that you made peace, Pinchas made peace between God and the Jewish people, and it says that who is the one who makes peace? It says Hineni Shalech Eliyahu Hanavi, that the one to make peace is Elijah. And in fact, most years, I don't think this year, but most years, the Haftorah, the part of the service of davening that we read following the Torah portion from the prophets, we usually read about Elijah the prophet. So we're going to talk a little bit about Elijah in connection to this week's Torah portion about Pinchas. So the story goes as follows. The story in Joshua starts in the book of Joshua, that after we all know the story of the walls of Jericho, Jericho in Hebrew, and after the walls fell down, Joshua said, anybody who rebuilds Jericho, with the loss of his firstborn shall he lay its foundation, with the loss of his youngest son shall he set up its gates. So, and for many years, therefore, Jericho remained desolate and was never rebuilt because of this curse that Joshua gave, and because the person's oldest son is going to die when they start the building, and his youngest son is going to die when they finish the building, as Joshua predicted. Now there was a man in the times of Elijah. His name was Chiel of Bethel. He rebuilt Jericho, and sure enough, his oldest son, I believe he had 7 children. His oldest son died when he laid his foundations, and his youngest son died when he finished the building of building the city of Jericho. And now Chiel was also the head of one of the chief. He was a very evil person, somebody that could be that cruel even to his own family. Just to disprove God, so to speak, even though it didn't work. He was one of the head of the priests of Baal, and Chiel, he did this to kind of to spite God, and he was a close friend of Achav. Achav, or Ahab in English. Achav becomes the king of Israel, and he was also an evil person and an idol worshiper. And Achav comes to visit. He comes to visit his friend who's mourning the loss of his last child. So, and Elijah comes also. Okay, so Elijah is the prophet of God. Achav is the evil king, and Chiel is the head of the Baal, of the idol worshippers, okay, who has mourning the loss of his last child. So Chiel is sitting there, and Chiel says that, yeah, maybe this is when Joshua made a curse. He said, even though maybe I changed the name of the city, right? It doesn't. The curse came true, and Elijah the prophet says, sure enough, yes, the curse came true, and this is what you're going through right now. So, Elijah, Achav says to Elijah, how could it be? How could it be that the curse came true when we are worshiping idols in the land of Israel at this time? The idol worshippers are all over the place. And the Torah says that if you go astray and you worship idols, then the Lord's anger will flare against you. As it says in Deuteronomy, he will close the heavens, there'll be no rain. And that curse has not been fulfilled. And if you say that how could the curse of Joshua, who's a student of Moses, be fulfilled when the curse of Moses himself is not being fulfilled? So right away, Elijah said, as God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, there shall be no rain or dew these years, but according to my word. He prayed for mercy. The Talmud tells us, this is all written in the Talmud, that he prayed for mercy. Well, the part of it is in the scripture, in the book of Kings, but this part is in the Talmud, that Elijah prays for mercy, and he was given the key to rainfall, enabling him to dictate when it would rain. Elijah arose and went, and it came to pass after some days that the rain dried up, and there was no rain in the land. The rivers dried up. There's no rain, all because of Elijah's getting the key. He gets the key to the rainfall. Now, what happens? God sees that there's famine in the land, and God sets up Elijah. He tells Elijah to go. He goes to a place called Sarfasa. Okay, whatever you say that in English, Zarephath. And he goes there, and this woman, this widow, has her only child, becomes sick, and I believe he died. So he now asks for the key to resurrection. There's a key for the resurrection of dead. Now, there's a key for rain, and there's also a third key. There's a key for children, to have children. So there's 3 keys. Okay, 3 keys. So he asks for the key to revive the dead, and God says, wait a second. How could it be that there's a key that you should have 2 keys? You're the student, I'm the master, I'm God. And how could it be that God will say that the student has 2 keys and the master of has one key? Therefore, if you want the key to reviving of the dead, you have to give me back the key for rain. And sure enough, that's what happens. And he had to revoke his oath, and the rain starts to fall again in the land of Israel. Okay, so we have the 3 keys, and we see that a student can only have 2. Now, a very interesting, we're going to discuss this a little bit, just to understand a little bit what's going on over here, and how this relates to righteous people in general. In 1951, when the Lubavitcher Rebbe took over the leadership of the Chabad movement, he said that we see, even though the story is written in the Talmud and the Medrash, and written in the books of Malachim and the book of Kings, we see that there were righteous people, including his predecessor, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, and the Baal Shem Tov, and other great rabbis throughout the generations, that they had access to all 3 keys. That sometimes people would come to them and they would bless them for children, they would bless them for health, which is related obviously to Tchias HaMesim, resurrection. They would bless them with Parnasa, which is related to rain, for livelihood. So we see that there were tzaddik and there were righteous people who blessed people with all 3. So it seemed they had access to all 3 keys. So how is it possible that So people came to the Rebbe and they started criticizing him for saying this, and he felt he had to defend his statement. So at a later gathering, a Hasidic gathering, the Rebbe explained what he meant by this idea. And he says as follows, that there's different types of tzaddikim. There's different types of righteous people. There are righteous people who are on the level of a student and a teacher, and there are righteous people who are on the level of a intermediary, with God, not an intermediary, because we obviously Jewish people, we don't believe in intermediaries, but somebody who's able to connect someone to God to the point that they lose their own identity. Like Moses lost his own identity. His identity becomes Torah and God, right? It says, Vayaminu b'Hashem, they believed in God, Uva Moshe Avdoi, and his servant. We say it every day in davening, from the splitting of the sea, that Moses became identified together with God in a way. Not because Moses has his own identity, but because Moses took on, so nullified himself that the God's will flowed through him. So there are such righteous people that the God's will flows through them to the point that they become identified as God, which is higher even than a agent. When it comes to the laws of agency, or in Hebrew shlichut, for example, a person is allowed to, if someone wants to, for example, get married, not actual marriage, but a betrothal, okay? Which nowadays we do it all together, getting betrothed and getting actually married. It's all done under the chuppah in one ceremony. But back in the times of the Talmud, they would actually do betrothal separately. That they would go and they would give a monetary value, like we do today, a ring, or anything of monetary value, and they would give it to a woman, and they would say, "You are betrothed to me," and then they would make a wedding at a later date. Now, according to the Talmud, discusses the laws of betrothal, that you can actually have someone else do it for you. You can have an agent. You say, okay, there's a woman in such a town. I can't make it. I don't want anyone else to marry her. You give her give him something of monetary value, and they could do this betrothal. Same thing applies in the laws of divorce. The same thing applies in many, many other mitzvahs that you're allowed to do through a shliach, an agent. Now, when it comes to the laws of agency, the agency, it says that it comes to the point that yad ki yadai, that your hand actually represents the hand of the your hand actually represents the hand of the person who sent you. However, there are limits. There are limits to that. For example, there are certain mitzvahs that only have to be done b'gufay, have to be done with someone's body. For example, the mitzvah of tefillin. I can't say, can you please put on tefillin for me? Right? That's something that your body has to put on tefillin. So your arm has to put on tefillin. If his arm put on tefillin, it doesn't help my arm put on tefillin. The same thing, the joke is when I was in school, the example they gave was you can't call someone on the highway and say, I'm stuck in traffic, please go to the bathroom for me, right? There's certain things that's at a point that your body has to do. You have to sit in the sukkah, your body has to eat matzah, etc. So there's a limit to that. Even in things that are not related to the body directly, by the way, marriage also, right? The actual marriage has to be done through a person. You can't send an agent to do that. There are things, however, even though they're not related to the body, they cannot be done through you cannot do agency for it. For example, if the agent were to do something that's against the will of the person who sent him, it would not be considered it would not be considered like he did it. For example, if you say, I want to marry so and so, I want to marry Mrs. S, and this person goes and marries Mrs. Y and betroths Mrs. Y. It doesn't matter, because you didn't follow the will of the person who sent you. Or the same thing applies that there is no such thing as agency, do a bad thing, because we know that a Jew really never wants to do something against God. That's their true nature. So therefore, there's no such thing as if you say, please go, God forbid, hurt someone, and you say, you're my agent, the person who actually does it is liable. You can't say, he told me to do it, I'm just representing him, I'm just his hand. It doesn't work like that. You are responsible because there's no agency to do something bad. Okay, so we see here that we're saying even more, that there are people throughout history, Jewish history, like Moses and others, that they were so nullified to God that they would they're representing God, and therefore there's no separation. So therefore, they're not on a level of a student and a teacher that we said earlier by Elijah, that Elijah said, God said to him, how can the student have two and you have one? But in this case, we see there are rabbis who did have the ability to have all three because they were doing God's will. So what's the $1 million question? How can you say about Elijah that he wasn't doing God's will? Elijah is not on the level of Moses, not on the level of the Lubavitcher rabbis, not on the level of the Baal Shem Tov. But Elijah is Elijah, right? One of the greatest prophets. He was so perfect. He never sinned to the point that he went to heaven alive. So how can you say that Elijah was not on this level? So we see here that actually the reason is because when Elijah was what he was doing by withholding rain, that is something that was not representing God's will. Now, even though, right, the Torah says that if you do something bad, like worshiping idols, that rain doesn't come. But because we know that from God, nothing really bad happens. Everything that comes from God is good. We might not see it, right? It might, but the truth of God is everything that comes from God is good, and therefore, in that scenario, he did not he did not have the ability to have all three keys, because in that situation, he wasn't representing God. So we see here that when if we want to, we could have a lot of lessons we could learn from this, but one thing we could learn is that if we have an opportunity to bring somebody closer to God, right, we could use two ways. If we want to bring either ourselves closer to God or somebody else, you could use negative things, punishment, or you could use positive things. And we see here that from God's perspective, the punishment was not the right thing, to the point that he had to set up Elijah in the situation that he needed to ask for the key back, in order that rain should be able to fall, and that by giving good, by influencing people in a positive way, that is the true way that we can affect other people. Wishing everybody a good Shabbos, and we will see you, God willing, next week.